Welcome to the Artful Teaching Podcast. My name's Heather Francis, and I'm your host today. This is episode 3, and it's also the final episode in our series on action research. If you missed the last 2 episodes, we have already introduced the importance and the purpose of action research. That was episode 1. And in episode 2, we discussed the differences between action research and self-study. Today, I'm hoping to give you a few more examples of both action research and self-study. Also, we created this series to help teachers in our Arts Integration Endorsement Program because they have a capstone project this semester that requires them to do an action research or self-study project. So even if you're not in that program, this is great information for any teacher looking to use reflective practice and systematic inquiry to improve student learning in their classroom or their classroom culture. So you don't need to be given an assignment to do action research to benefit and to engage in this kind of activity for professional learning as a teacher. All right, so let's dive in. Today I have 3 examples. I'm going to start with a self-study that was conducted by a seasoned 3rd grade teacher who participated in the Arts Integration Endorsement Program towards the end of her career. She was planning on teaching only a couple more years. So I'm going to read directly from this teacher's final paper where she reflected on her self-study experience. She has given me permission to read this, and I'm so grateful because this is an example of how teachers really can lean into the idea of studying themselves as a mean to serving the children in their classroom. And I'm going to call this part 1 example. I'm going to title it A Stressful Self-Study. Here we go. When the self-study project was announced in the arts endorsement class, I was completely overwhelmed. The week before, our much-loved principal announced that he was being transferred to a new school that was being built and his last day would be the end of January. Aside from all of us being completely heartbroken about the change, he wanted to get all of our yearly observations and evaluations done before he left. He also wanted to have interviews with us and a going away assembly and a party, which we had to plan. All of those were in addition to the requirement that had been put on us to do the RISE benchmark, and we had to do those tests every week and evaluate the data. I also had a lot of personal issues come into my personal life that were causing a great deal of stress for me at the time. I had been having a lot of negative feelings about teaching in general, and all of these things compounded to make for a very frustrating arts integration class that week. As I came down the hall, the director, Callie, was coming towards me. She stopped me and asked how I was. I told her my feelings and told her I was very frustrated with the self-study project. After listening to me, she suggested I change my project to address how focusing on self-care could alleviate the stresses in my life personally and as a teacher. I felt tremendous relief and became excited about my project. I sat down and I was able to get my proposal written in a matter of minutes. It felt like exactly what I needed. I was excited. My self-study question was, how can what I know about managing the stresses of teaching and life support myself as a long-term teacher? I plan to retire in the next 5 years, but I needed to find ways to manage teaching stress in an ever-changing educational environment so I can find joy in my profession again. Integrating the arts is helpful, but maybe not enough. I am currently a 3rd grade teacher. My students are from a lower to middle socioeconomic background. I have 31 students, 18 girls and 13 boys. I have a couple of English language learners, but they are quite fluent in English. Our school is very small. We have 2 classes per grade level for most grades. Our school culture is a very tight-knit community with a fair amount of parent involvement. The teachers are a close and supportive group. The Thursday after I talked with Callie about my new self-study project, I spent a lot of time reflecting on what self-care looks like for me. I spent time writing and journaling things I needed to do differently, things I did well, and things that I have done in the past for my own self-care. These became my field notes. I felt like I came up with a good list of things that would help me. I realized during my reflections that I have gotten into some very negative thought patterns that have impacted how I felt about work and about my life. Even after simply writing, acknowledging this reality and coming up with some ideas on how to change it, I felt more relaxed than I had been in a while. In my reflections, I noticed that I had let a lot of things go that helped me to relax and de-stress. Some of those things were exercising, eating well, reading, crocheting. Since doing the arts endorsement, I've noticed I've stopped doing many of the self-care that I have done in the past because of time restraints. Even with the extra stressors in my life this week, I found putting even just a few things back into my life helped tremendously. One thing I started doing again was my thankfulness journal. I had used a thankful journal in the past, but had not been keeping it since school started. I was surprised how much of a difference it made in my attitude and how I felt. Something else I started doing was listening to positive podcasts. They were helpful with my mindset. I found a podcast from Jody Moore's coaching school. She talked about finding the fun in work and how to make it fun. She gave some insights on how to make work fun and not saying things such as, first we work, then we have fun, but make work fun. This was a big mindset shift for me, as work had been really hard for a while, and everything I'd learned about integrating the arts I had to let go so that I could do those RISE benchmarks. I became excited to implement more ideas and to try some things with my students. I wanted to try some mindfulness exercises I learned with my students as well. After talking with my critical friend the first time, I reevaluated some of the things I'd been doing and decided to try new ones. One thing I'd been doing at home frequently was answering emails. My critical friend suggested I not even open emails at home. Only view and answer emails at school. Another suggestion was to not take anything home. A third suggestion from my critical friend was to set a quitting time as close to 4 o'clock as possible, and I did pretty good with all of these suggestions. I then spent a weekend with my family doing things I enjoy. I read, I crocheted, I went for walks, I cooked healthy food. I found a couple mindfulness podcasts that have been helping me put things into perspective. It was nice to spend time away from all the planning and thinking about school. However, after that weekend, I paid for it. I was not prepared for the next school day. Thank goodness the kids were much calmer and settled than they had been the previous week, but I was stressed all day trying to stay one step ahead of the kids all day long. I found it was important to do the things my critical friend and I discussed. However, I find it very difficult to be prepared for the next day without taking things home. I found I needed to find a way to be prepared, but still have some time away from school to be me and be with my friends and family. I didn't feel like I was dealing better with the students and the issues that came up. I learned that when I take time for myself away from school, I handle things better at school. I also learned I deal better with difficult students and situations when I am fully prepared. I found during this week that there was a delicate balance between leaving work at home and being prepared so the day is not stressful. During the final visit with my critical friend, we reviewed what had happened with my plan to leave work early and to leave work at school. We reviewed how that went and what changes I could make for a positive impact on my mindset and my teaching. My goals for the week were to go to bed on time, exercise, do an Adobe Spark media arts activity with my students to integrate the arts. During this week, I went for a walk on most days, had some downtime to think and to journal. I tried to get to bed on time and fix healthful foods that I know will make me feel good. I clearly see how my physical and mental well-being have a direct impact on how I am as a teacher. Most days I felt better able to handle the stresses of the school day, and every day went better and I was much more patient and happy to be at school. My thankful journal helped me to focus on the best parts of the day, and I felt it carried over into school. I also took time on Tuesday and Thursday nights to spend time with some friends and not even think about school. I'd been neglecting time with friends as of late and decided I needed to be more proactive in my friendships. Both evenings were relaxing and refreshing. During this week, I intentionally integrated more arts activities. Our principal had been asking us since December to trim back anything extra and do the RISE benchmarks as many times a week as we possibly could. At first he said it was optional, but then he came back and said it was required, and it had been stressful and not a lot of fun for anybody. As I followed that plan, I was hating teaching more, and I was having more behavior issues. I was more and more stressed every week. I decided that it was time to put the arts back in. With a new principal and one who had not been in the school much that month, I had more freedom to do what I felt was right. My self-study project helped me to see the importance of taking care of myself to be a better teacher for my students. It also showed me the importance of making sure I'm prepared and ready for each day. The third thing I learned was that integrating the arts makes me excited to teach, and it makes the students engaged and excited about their learning. In conclusion, having teachers that are happy and not burned out is not only important for the teacher, but the students as well. A healthy teacher means a healthy classroom. A healthy classroom means healthy students. As the world and teaching profession continue to become a more stress-filled place, it is vital that teachers learn how to handle the stressors of life and their jobs so they can be happy in their careers and help students to be happy at school. Well, I just love that story. I thought it was a great example of self-study. She really focused on herself. She collected data from her journal. She had data from her conversations with her critical friends. And I think she probably also had some physical data, the way that she felt in her body, her energy level, her feeling of rest and relaxation. So she did a great job collecting different data, analyzing it, reflecting on it, and now she can really express what it is about self-care that is helping her and helping her students. So great work on that project. That is our first example. I'm now going to go to our second example. The next example is an action research project, and it describes a teacher who studies the impact of a specific intervention to achieve a certain learning or behavior goal in their classroom. I'm just going to recite some of this story from memory and what I remember about their project. And same cohort for this teacher as the last one. They both participated in the program around the same time. This teacher had recently completed the training workshops in our arts integration endorsement on mind mapping. And these workshops are taught by Scott Flox and Callie Flox. And mind mapping workshops are always really eye-opening and revelatory for our participants. So I hope if you're listening that at some point you get a chance to take these workshops, because they're really fun and teachers find a lot of ways to apply the arts in their classroom through this mind mapping strategy. And the strategy is mind mapping for learning. It's when you take a large sheet of paper, you label it with the topic of study, maybe in the center of the page or at the top of the page, and then you guide the students through making diagrams, charts, drawing icons or graphic images to represent facts, knowledge that they gain as they're studying a specific topic. And then they can use lines and arrows to describe the connections between those individual pieces, those graphic images on the mind map. So you can really see what the students are thinking and learning and knowing about the topic you're studying. And then using the visual art and the icons helps them make those connections and commit it to memory. I really shouldn't be the one explaining this. I'm not the expert. Scott Flox and Callie Flox and Deborah Escalante actually wrote a book about this mind mapping strategy, and we'll have a link for that soon on the Advancing Arts Leadership website. So look forward to that soon. But that's what this action research project was looking at. So after the teacher in this story, after their experience with those workshops, they selected the following question for their research project. How well am I able to use mind mapping to integrate art, science, and literacy standards into a single lesson? So this is written like a self-study question because there's obviously that pronoun I inside of it. But as you continue to listen to how this study unfolds, there's a lot of action research elements in it because he's really testing that strategy along with his ability to implement that strategy. So this teacher had been teaching elementary school for 10 years. They mostly taught second and third grade. They predominantly taught white students from a lower middle class, and they had during the time of this project, they had like one English language learner, one student with disabilities. They had a pretty talkative class, but nothing like unmanageable. When describing the purpose of their question, the teacher described how they had focused on literacy for so long, and they had done a lot of professional development and a lot of professional skill development to better teach literacy to their students. But in doing the arts integration endorsement, they were noticing that they had completely neglected other areas of the curriculum in pursuit of that literacy. And so they felt that they were not leaving enough time to help students develop knowledge and skills in science and social studies and the arts, and that students were becoming less excited about school. So that teacher wanted to see if mind mapping could help integrate all these subjects in an exciting and engaging manner. So the hypothesis was realistic. The teacher believed that they could do that. They could integrate all of these subjects in one lesson. And they also believed that it would cut down on some planning time. And that's always a bonus, right? But they also recognized that they predicted some students wouldn't be engaged and that some might shut down and fake that they're like doing a mind map or look for ways to cause problems. And I'd say that sounds like a very realistic teacher expectation. So along with field notes, the teacher wrote formal reflections each week to share with their critical friend. And the discussion that they shared was directly related to questions that the teacher had formulated before he started his study that were sort of sub-questions of the original research question. So some of those questions included, how successful am I at integrating multiple curricular areas into mind mapping? What do I feel successful at? Why? How well are the students engaged? Is this a strategy that motivates me? What areas do I need to improve to better integrate all of these subjects into mind mapping? How did I find my data? How successful am I at integrating all of these areas into mind mapping? Additional data that was collected was a random sample of 6 students and parents that they also interviewed about the mind mapping activities. So I thought that was an interesting data set to collect. Interviews are a great way to get really descriptive data. So after collecting the data and discussing with the critical friend, this teacher answered all of those questions for analysis to write their final paper. And they answered each one of the questions with just a small pithy paragraph with evidence from their data that shows what they did learn about their practice and how the reader of their paper could know that what they learned actually existed, what the evidence was. So here are some of the findings. First question, how successful was I? Here's the teacher's answer. I was shocked at how little effort I had put into the actual planning of it. And that's just a piece of the answer. Next question, how well were the students engaged? The students were actively participating both verbally and following closely with their pencil and paper. This was absolutely shocking to me, and I was excited to see that students were more engaged throughout this task than other types of instruction given throughout the day. So again, some good evidence and findings. Next question, how can I improve? One thing I noticed from reviewing photos of the student mind maps and discussing with my critical friend was that the quality of some of the student pictures was a little lacking. I need to increase my focus on specific art skills during the mind mapping. On our second mind map, I spent much more time with guided drawing, focused the mind mapping around a central picture, and then we added text and icons to it. I noticed that this got the students more engaged at the beginning of the lesson, and their drawings improved. Next question, how did my critical friend help? While talking to my critical friend, it became apparent to me how excited I am about mind mapping combined with drawing instruction. I realized that teaching through mind mapping is taking a burden off my shoulders. It's a strategy that comes natural to me, and I feel I'm able to implement it with little effort. It has reinvigorated me as a teacher, and I find myself talking to my critical friend and being really excited about the results I'm seeing. She encouraged me to make some modifications and try it again and figure out why it is working for me. So why is it working for me? I noticed a gradual increase in confidence with each mind map. At the beginning of the year, I had multiple students that just shut down, ripped up their paper when something didn't work out. I had several students who would go super fast and create extremely sloppy work. With each consecutive mind map and accompanying drawing instruction, my students' confidence levels have increased. My students aren't afraid to fail or try again. They aren't racing as much to be the first one to shout, "Done!" Instead, they're beginning to take their time to create something worth creating. And I'm starting to see this resilience show up in other areas of learning as well. And the students are much more willing to try new things, and they're okay receiving criticism or feedback and to learn from their failures. I also feel more excited about teaching as I have been able to spend less time on planning and classroom management and more time on teaching important skills through great literature and art. So that's our second example. Again, I think it's a great example of being very intentional about the data that's being collected, and especially very intentional about the question they had from the very beginning. You can see that through line. All the way through their project, they had a single focus on answering that original question. Okay, and now for our third example, I'm actually going to step away from narrating these examples, and I'm going to play excerpts of a recording that I took during the Arts Integration Endorsement Program in January of 2019. This is when we introduced self-study to our program participants, and it was introduced by Tina McCulloch, who is an excellent arts integration teacher in the Provo City School District, and she gave a presentation on how she completed a self-study as part of her master's thesis as a graduate student. And so I recorded her presentation just for my own keepsake at the time, and she's now provided me with permission to share it with you. The audio recording is not great. I apologize, but the content is excellent, so I do feel that it's worth sharing with you, and I think you're really going to like it. So without further ado, here is excerpts from Tina McCulloch's presentation on self-study from January 2019.
My context is in my school. I had 50% of my students were English learners. Typically, I had 1 or 2 students in my classroom who were new to the country. And when I first started teaching at this school, I taught 3rd grade, and now I'm teaching 5th grade. So that kind of gives you an idea. Another thing is in the school that I fell into, it was a focus on assessment and remediation. Every Friday we would have given a number of assessments, and then the next week we had to have plans for remediation on those things. And I felt trapped in the cycle of assessing and remediating and never getting to enjoy the teaching process and never getting to enjoy my students. And so one thing that the students did in order to avoid the assessment is they didn't show up on Fridays. Okay? And so absenteeism was huge. Also, students didn't show up for the first 30 minutes of school because that's when they knew math remediation was taking place. So, I was kind of one of those, I was a new teacher, I was in my 3rd, 4th year, and I wondered what my purpose was. And that's when I was able to go to the Arts Academy, and it changed my view. It changed me. So there were a lot of things that I was able to do because of the Arts Academy and put it into my teaching practice. And I started loving teaching again. And I would love to tell you the story that my students started showing up again, but I wasn't brave enough yet. And so coming down to the last part of this, swapping math remediation with directed drawing instruction. So I don't know about you guys, but it's always the same group of students every week who don't perform well in the test. And I said, I'm remediating the same group of students every week because they just need some extra practice. And yes, it does help if I teach it a little bit differently, but what they're really getting is more practice. What I really need for my students, number 1, to show up to school on time, and number 2, for them to learn how to listen and observe. And so I said, I'm not teaching remediation anymore, math remediation. I'm going to teach math remediation by doing directed drawings. And so, like my other colleagues, the same students still needed RTI. So I just made sure that I addressed it as a, what is it called? You know, when you keep teaching it.
Tier 1 or Tier 2?
No, it's a review every day in Tier 1. Yes.
Spiral.
Spiral review, that's what I'm looking for. And I was addressing that need. The same students were still tardy and absent. But in the students who started drawing, I saw new confidence. The dichotomy of my classroom changed. They started looking at some of those kids who were always in the RTI group with new eyes. They noticed that that kid who can't do math and can't read drew beautifully. And all of a sudden, her social standing in the classroom increased. Her confidence increased. And it wasn't just one student, it was multiple students. And I thought, I'm onto something here, but I didn't articulate it yet. Until one day my principal walked down the hall and said, Mrs. Clegg, is that yours? I said, no. And I told him whose it was. And all of a sudden he saw her with new eyes too. And the other thing that was a bonus is I had a new relationship with my students. Think about it. They were coming to school to draw first thing in the morning. I was relaxed. They were relaxed. We had a creative moment together. They made some great progress on a drawing that they couldn't wait to hang in the hall. And the other thing, the improved listening and thinking. And I didn't get this at first, that they had really grown in this, until one day a teacher got sick in the middle of the day and had to leave. And so we were finishing a project, and her class had been split into mine and my colleagues. And I thought, well, they can join us with this drawing. And so I paired them up with amongst my students. And as we started the directed drawing, one of the kids said, I can't do this. And the kid sitting next to him from my class said, you don't say that in here. You listen and you look. And then they were going along, and another kid says, mine looks stupid. And they said, you don't say that in here. You have to look and compare. And then another student said, is this good enough? And they said, we don't say that in here. Is it your best? And so they were listening better. They were thinking, and they were comparing with a model. And they made their own artistic choices. They knew when they needed to redo, and they knew when it was their best. And so I didn't teach art to improve math, because it stayed the same. But I taught art so that we could have a new experience in that classroom. And it shaped their math experience because we had a better relationship. And so where did it bring me? Well, in the middle of my evolution, I started graduate school at Brigham Young University. And I had this big question that I wanted to have answered when I did my thesis. And so part of the opening is, so what is your thesis about? And I said, I want to know about how arts integration improves reading comprehension of English learners. And they said, that's too big. You need to shorten that. And I said, but I need to know how art influences reading comprehension, and my students are English learners. Well, you can just study about English learners. No, I need to know how it fits together. And Dr. Pinniger, she's an awesome lady. She came to me and she said, Tina, you need to do a self-study. I thought, I don't want to know about myself. That's kind of egotistical. Okay, if you look at yourself, and she goes, no, your question is a self-study. You want to know why you use arts integration to teach reading comprehension to English learners. You need to uncover for yourself how you use arts integration for their English language learners so they have reading comprehension. You need to reveal how you teach reading comprehension to English language learners using arts integration. And so Dr. Pinniger and I had this fight back and forth, that I didn't want to do a self-study. But then I began to realize that it was the way I needed to use it. Because otherwise I needed to get rid of one of my parts and be a quantitative researcher, where I had an intervention of arts integration to produce one thing, and I hate testing. So I knew I wasn't going to go there. So I had to do a self-study. And in that self-study, I had to learn to ask myself questions and look at myself. Here's how I did my self-study. It might give you some hints. I use curriculum unit plans. I don't have any student data in this. Okay. You could also use lesson plans. You could use transcripts from you teaching a lesson. Okay. I use curriculum unit plans, and I wrote about what I did. So I had my lesson plan all laid out in one column. I wrote what I did, what I did, what I did, what I did, what I did. And then I shared that with my critical friends with some questions. Did I use arts integration? Did I use reading comprehension? And did I use English learner strategies? That all sounds like a yes-no answer, doesn't it? Well, Callie was one of my critical friends, and Colleen was one of my critical friends. I chose Callie because she's like the arts guru, right? Arts integration guru. And she was willing to do that for me. Colleen is one of my colleague teachers in my school, and she teaches the same students I do. She understands that population. And she also incorporates arts integration in her classroom. And so, as I had provided them what's called prompts and probes, you will also provide your critical friend with prompts and probes. And in that question and what this is a self-study, stuff that you're going to be reading, it'll give you some guidelines on creating that. And so while my critical friends were looking through my unit plans, looking for those instances, I went back through my unit plans and looked at why do I do what I do. I use the same prompts and probes as my critical friends, and I found an entirely new story. I found a story about my students' experience in my classroom. I had what my lesson plan is, what I did, but then I said, why do I do what I do? Why did I plan that tableau experience for the Revolutionary War for this reading text that we had? I did it for my 2 new-to-the-country ELs. They didn't have enough language at the time, but they could show me that they understood the story. They could show me that they understood the nuance and the relationships. And so as I did that second annotation, I started writing narratives of my students. I started also writing my experience with students, that interpersonal relationship that I was seeing. And I became that reflective teacher. So that when I got the commentary from Callie and I got the commentary from Colleen, I started going across and looking at all those things. And then I wrote a new reflection. So I hope you understand, is that you will revisit that over and over again. And as you do, it becomes more and more a part of uncovering what you are. And that's the importance about critical friends. Now, the epiphany I had, it didn't come from me doing my own reflection. It came from my critical friends. Callie and Colleen both wrote back, and they both said, you do arts integration to establish a classroom culture. I said, I do? And they both pointed out exactly where I do what I do. Colleen went a step further. She said, you advocate for arts every time you open up your mouth in faculty meeting. I said, I do. Again, she went back to my unit plans and showed me where I've done that. And so that was the big epiphany of the whole thing. The reason I do arts integration is because it's my personality. It's how I learned as a learner. And it's how I connect with my students. And I didn't realize what a classroom culture it was until I changed from 3rd grade to 5th grade, and that kid came into my class. And he walked in the first day and goes, Mrs. McCulloch, I can't wait to be in your class. We're going to draw. And his mom came in and says, my son has been so excited ever since he found out that you were going to be his teacher. And it wasn't just one parent who said it, and it wasn't one student who said it. They knew what to expect in my classroom. And so the culture came with them, which again reaffirmed that I was on the right track. So Stern says, self-study links our lives and experiences by attending to those present moments. So those little narratives that I was writing, that was those moments where I was really teaching arts integration for reading comprehension of English learners. But was it my first time to write the annotation? Nope. Was it the second time? Almost. It was when I combined my critical friends and my own story that I figured those things out. And so this is something I wrote in my thesis that I thought sounded brilliant, but now reading it to you kind of doesn't. I viewed where my experience intersected with the arts integrated curriculum unit plans and what I understood about reading comprehension. This influenced how I employed arts integration pedagogy to support English, language, and literary development. And so now when a principal asks me why I do what I do, I can say that. And of course he's impressed because it sounds big, but I can advocate for the way I teach now. And that's one of the things that a self-study does, is you finally articulate that gut feeling or that flow that we get into a classroom and everything is working and everyone is learning and everyone is engaged. I can articulate that. Before it was just, I do it because it's working. We're happy. Well, now you can articulate it in an educational way. So at the end, now I have a new beginning. I'm purposeful in my teaching choices. I don't just do directed drawings. I know why I do directed drawings. And I know there are certain steps that I do every time when I go to teach a directed drawing. Also, I can advocate for it. I really don't need 30 more minutes of RTI, of math. But I do need to build that relationship that happens with my students as we do directed drawings. And I can also mentor other teachers. Instead of sending them off to an arts express or something else, oh, go do this, or here's my lesson plans, just follow it and it'll work. Now I can actually teach them the reasoning behind it. I do a directed drawing and this is the first step because you want this outcome. I could also say to another teacher, they can come and see what I have in the hall. Oh, I can do that. They go and they find a picture on Google Images, and then they tell their class to just copy. It doesn't work. And they don't get the same results. And now I can mentor them through the process of what I do first, how I set the students up for success. And it does make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on the Artful Teaching podcast and for this mini-series on action research. We want to let you know we have a really exciting series coming out this fall on the Native American Curriculum Initiative. We will have Native artists, our lesson plan designers, classroom teachers, and other guests here to talk about how we together can amplify Native voices in the classroom. So thanks for being with us, and as always, have an artful day.